Well, we haven't finished with the nativity star. Even after 2 talks, we haven't finished. I didn't intend to do things this way, but when something starts flowing, it's very hard to resist it, and I don't even think it's a wise thing to do to try to resist an inner flow. Now, in the talk yesterday, we spoke of someone seeing the midnight sun, and when seeing the midnight sun, they were so startled that they started screaming. That is a kind of first-hand experience, but it's not the most important kind of first-hand experience. It is an experience of the inner worlds, and it came through the inner worlds, but there are better ways of doing it. The most important thing about the inner worlds is finding them in ourselves. And then when we find things in ourselves, we can live them out and we own them, so to speak. They are an intimate part of our being. So our life and how we live is what counts. Max Heindel used to like to quote Angelus Silesius. He said, "Though Christ 1,000 times in Bethlehem be born, if not within thyself, thy life will be forlorn." Meaning to say that the outward Christ cannot save us. It is only when we establish the Christ within ourselves so that we resonate with the cosmic Christ that we are in the place where we should be or develop as we should develop. So we are aspiring Christian mystics. And we live our lives in vain unless we are born in Christ and Christ is born in us. And the Christ being born in us is something that is a very slow developing first-hand kind of experience. This is probably the best kind of first-hand experience a person can have. Now, in all of these talks, both in the morning and in the evening, we're looking at the Gospels as texts for the Christian mysteries. They're like handbooks for how to experience the life of Christ or the important incidents in the life of Christ in ourselves, to find them in our inner being. The key to decoding these texts is trying to live them. And when we try to live them, we understand the key principles that are in them. This has been proven many times over by successful Christian mystics throughout the centuries. For example, we have that famous book called The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. And he describes that process, and he describes the inner dialogue with the Christ within and how he comes to that. So, applying that to what we've been doing for the last several days, this means that to really understand the star of the Nativity, we have to develop the Nativity star within ourselves. Now, as we saw in the first talk, there are 2 very different lineages of Jesus and 2 very different nativity scenes. They're both in the stars. If you look at Christmas Eve, you'll find everything there if you look at the constellations. But one of them has a lot of shepherds and light and choirs into heaven. That's in St. Luke's Gospel. The other has the wise men and the star. Now, the tone of each of these Gospels is very different. St. Luke's Gospel is visual, and there is a feelingful emphasis throughout St. Luke's Gospel. It is for a feeler, for an emotional type of person. St. Matthew's Gospel is very strict, and it's very morally demanding. Even in the Beatitudes, there are things that are so strict in there that it makes a person shudder thinking about them. Now, it's obvious that St. Luke's Gospel is more for people who need to follow a devotional path. And St. Matthew's Gospel is more for people who want to follow a moral creed or philosophical path to the spiritual life. From the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, we learn that discipline is necessary for first-hand experience. You can't have esoteric experience that you can really claim is yours unless you have the discipline that you can control it. Things that just happen to you are not really spiritual developments. They may intimate that true spirituality is available to you if you're willing to put in the work, but they do not represent true esoteric development. Esoteric development involves conservation of the creative force. We each have allotted to us in any given life a certain amount of the creative energy, the sexual energy, the libido energy. We have a certain amount that is available to us, and the amount that is available depends on how we've lived in past rebirths. But in the spiritual life, it is not just continence. Because if you're just continent alone, that can be very, very dangerous. I've known of people that have gone crazy with just trying to hold the sexual energy in and never express it, but at the same time not directing it. When I lived at Mount Ecclesia many years ago, there was a woman there that was all of her life, she was never married. But she worked. She had 3 different jobs. She worked night and day. And then she was going to retire. And she had that continent sexual energy, so much of that, and when she no longer had the outlet for it in work, she went crazy within a very few months' time because it was just too much for her. In the esoteric life, it is continence with an attitude of reverent purity and with an activity of spiritual service, that you use everything that you have available to serve the Christ. So it's about aspiration to a higher type of life. When we do that, the sexual energy automatically rises up the spine. It follows exactly the way we live. Eventually, it flows into the cranium. And that is when the self-control is necessary and important. If we have awakened and excited the spiritual force in us, and we become sensual, that turns it downward and outward, and our lives are very forlorn as a result of it. But when it's rising, it has to be controlled. And there are lemniscat, figure 8 cycles or figure 8 paths that the sexual energy takes. And it depends whether you are a mystic or whether you are an occultist, the path that the spiritual energy takes in your body. In all cases, when it's in the cranium before descending, whether it descends down through the heart or whether it descends down through the spine, it has to be activated. And to activate it, there has to be a spiritual bridge between the pituitary body and the pineal gland. It's sort of like if you imagine a fountain with water coming up and going out, and you want to connect 2 points through the water. It's almost like blowing against the water and then setting up a wave that goes to the other side to make a standing wave or to make a connection between the pituitary body and the pineal gland. This is done in esoteric exercises by volitionally moving the pituitary body with a rhythm. Now, this is not something simple. Most people can't even wiggle their ears. And most people, do you know where the pituitary body is in your head without looking at a diagram? Can you feel the pituitary body? It's not a simple thing. You have to have an internal discernment and discrimination of where things are in your inner consciousness, and then you have to, as an act of will, you have to be able to set a vibratory flow in the pituitary body. And the pituitary body is the only one of the entire system of endocrine glands that is connected to the nervous system. The anterior lobe of the pituitary body has a nerve connected to it. And so it can voluntarily be set in motion through the nerve and through voluntary activity. And what happens is that you then form a bridge between two different currents. And when those two currents are connected and unified, they can be directed through what is called the silent watcher. The silent watcher is not an organ at all. It is in inner space. It is a focus of the divine spirit. And when you bring the energy through that focus, that focus is right near the root of the nose inwardly, right near the frontal sinus. There's a frontal sinus in that part of the brain. And then what happens is you open up an inner vision. And that inner vision is brilliant. It is described like the brilliancy of many stars put together, all focused in one place. And gradually you are able to work yourself into that, and you can see whatever you want to see. That is the real nativity star. That is what leads us to where we need to go to. You might say that no matter what direction you're facing east or you're facing orientation, because that is the star by which you guide your life. It is a seeing of the truth. It is a knowing of what is true. And that is what the nativity star is. It's a very important thing. That's what we're striving for. That's what leads us to the Christ. We can see for ourselves. So it took us more than 2 talks to finally get to what the nativity star is. Yesterday, we saw the nativity star in an esoteric sense, but we saw it outwardly. We saw it in the mystic sun. Today, we see the nativity star inwardly. All of the rest of the material wasn't really the the Nativity Star. It was interesting, it was informative, and it told us about the time of the beginning of the incarnation in a cosmic sense, but it wasn't really an understanding of the Nativity Star for when the Christ is born within ourselves. All right. Took us too long, but it was worth it. Incidentally, when you see that light, I am told that when you look at that light, no matter how bright it is, it doesn't hurt you. If you look into the sun, it hurts your eyes. But when you look into the spiritual light, it's like it's a healing sensation, and it's a pleasant sensation no matter how bright it is. The only problem is if you're not a pure and holy person, when you look into that light, you sort of feel ashamed of yourself in your impurity.
Is it similar to the bright light that people see in near-death experience?
Probably the same thing.
Late question.
Yes.
Did you turn the recorder on?
Yes.
Just checking.
Yeah. Yeah, good, thank you.
One little item. The woman that saw the midnight sun in New York, would she have done this?
No. No. You sometimes get flashes of clairvoyance that are not a controlled, it's not awakened faculty. And that happens to everybody along the way. And that's all the more incentive when you start seeing light, or you start seeing colors, or you start sensing the presence of things around you. That's all the more incentive to work on the control, so that you recognize that you're close enough that if you really do some work, you'll be able to get somewhere. All right, now we go from feast to famine, because what we're going into now does not have the astrological richness that we had with the Nativity Star. And we have to review astrology to see what we're doing. The Rosicrucian Fellowship teaches astrology. And the main use for astrology for the esoteric student is for self-help. Because the horoscope is something like a mirror. It's a mirror of what goes on in your soul. And so if there are things that need perfection, they are indicated in the horoscope. So for this reason, Rosicrucian students are admonished that they should study astrology for themselves. And that way you can see and know for yourself. You can intuitively look at it and say, yep, that's me. We do use astrology to help others, but when you're working on without, it's not always as pertinent. It's not always as clear as when you use it for yourself. And that usually isn't emphasized. Sometimes it can be a good service, sometimes not. But when we do use astrology to help others, it is given with complete freedom. It comes freely from the heart. Because astrology is a sacred science. It shows the connection of the individual person to the whole cosmos. That's a very sacred connection. So in that little sheet of paper that you look at, it represents something that is very, very important. It's our whole life. So, in the Rosicrucian Fellowship, we never charge money for astrology, and we don't do astrology to make a self-promotion of ourselves. In fact, it is even so strict, so rigorous, that if somebody charges for astrology, they are immediately deprived of membership in the Rosicrucian Fellowship. And that's only the simple part. You are no longer given help, and you are no longer able to participate with the invisible helpers in the inner world if you start equating spiritual things with material things. You just can't do that. It is a denigration of something that is sacred and holy. Max Heindel referred to astrology as a sacred science, and he referred to it as an integral part of our world outlook, our religion, if you want to call it that. In this, astrology is one of the sciences used by the mysteries. And astrology has always been an integral part of all of the schools of the mysteries. The Hierophant had the astrologer and the musician as the two people that served the Hierophant. So it is in this sense that these talks are offered. Now, anyone who has ever had even a little glimpse of the spiritual world knows that there is unity. There's a prevailing unity of everything with everything else. There is that famous statement, in the universal spirit we live and move and have our being. Everything exists within the one, and the one subsists in itself. So the more deeply we move into the spiritual worlds, the more we find ourselves in worlds that are more subtle, that are more rare, and worlds that have greater power, the power behind the creation. And it's a power that expresses itself with ease. Within this spiritual unity, there are qualities. And the qualities are the character of things. St. John says, God is light. If we walk in the light as God is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. If the Spirit is like light, then one can see that within life integrally there are colors. However, the divine qualities that are within the spiritual light are more than color. They have character. And character is the quintessence or the ultimate essence of experience. And the entire creation, as long as it's gone on, so far we can't understand it with our mind, we can't comprehend it at all, there has been almost infinite experience. So, the spiritual qualities have character. And that character is what is the basis of astrology. It's even in our language, we say that she is a mercurial person, or he is a martial man, or we say that the atmosphere was Saturnine. Those aren't just linguistic conveniences. Those are things that come directly from the character of things as portrayed or as carried through language. In fact, the further you go back in language, like if you get to the language of the Vedas, when you read the Vedas, they are all gods. Like the quality of of this god or that god is the quality of heat or the quality of tanginess or something like that. Our language is an emanation from the character of the gods. And the character of the gods is expressed astrologically. So, astrology as we know it is just an outcropping of character in the cosmos. In this regard, astrology is like a universal language. It's like music or mathematics or mythology It's something that is integral in the spirit and is a way of us understanding an attribute of the spirit. Even a very superficial perusal of the deepest parts of the cosmic conception reveals that the creation is thick and rich with astrology. Now that kind of astrology that is in the deeper things of the cosmos is not horoscopes. It's something else. It's cosmological astrology. Now these talks, as we've been with them so far, have been about cosmological astrology. Now we're switching and we're going to look a little bit more at applied astrology, which is horoscopes and things like that. The two will be fused together, but we're trying to do something a little different. We did begin with the Nativity, and it was the Nativity, not of Jesus, but of the Nativity of the coming of the cosmic Christ. The Nativity is a birth, an initiation into the mysteries. It's the beginning of awakening into the spiritual world. And it's applicable to both uses of astrology. Now, the elements of horoscopy and cosmological astrology are pretty much the same, only the emphasis is different. We have constellations, and in constellations they are made up of stars. And those stars are emanations from great divine beings, like the divinity that is the end and purpose of our entire solar creation. So, the constellations represent the highest kind of cooperation possible. They represent collective contributions by groups of divine beings to create a stellar womb. And in that stellar womb is where a system like our solar system is born. After constellations, we have signs. And signs are fields of attitude. They are the fields of qualities. The signs are manifestations of principles, the principles behind the solar creation. The qualities and the principles that are the signs are derived from the constellations. The Rosicrucian cosmic conception teaches us that when a divinity, such as our sun, has finished its creative work or is ready to move on to greater creative work, its influence then gets spread to entire constellations, and it participates in that way. Now, it's not clear what the consociation of constellational activity is, and that's something that's way beyond our comprehension. It's a difficult thing. Now, in a manner similar to the manner that the signs are derivative from the constellations, the houses, which are called mundane houses, are derivatives from the signs. The difference is that houses relate to human occupation in mundane life. They're about the prosaic activities, about how we grow up as child, or the opportunity we have to make money, or our relations with our siblings, or something like that. It's very down-to-earth things. The houses have very little application to cosmological astrology. Therefore, you have to look very hard in the Gospels to find things that are direct statements of the houses. Planets represent specialized personifications of principles and qualities. Active, not just emanating, but active. They are also derivative from the signs. There's a very close relationship between the signs and the planets. The planets are like the different organs of our dense physical bodies. Each planet or each organ has a very specialized function. Each one and every one of them is necessary to the integrity of the whole. Aspects are the last element of astrology. Aspects are modes of activity. They are the tools that the planets use to accomplish what they need to accomplish in the creative activity. They are represented in geometrical figures, but their effect is very specific. So those are the basic astrological elements. The statement of them, as we normally hear them, is related to horoscopy and not so much to cosmology. But all of the elements are used in both horoscopy and cosmological astrology. As an example, aspects are very valuable to horoscope work, not so valuable to constellational activity of the highest level in the cosmos. Constellations are important to that higher, deeper level of things. We're looking in these talks at the Gospels as myths, sacred myths for the purpose of initiation into the Christian mysteries. Therefore, we should expect to find astrological elements in the Gospels where they are appropriate. There are a few of most of the astrological elements in the Gospels, but not a lot of them are of the type that are used in horoscopy. This is exactly what we expect, because the Gospels are not intended as textbooks of astrology. There were people who were writing textbooks of astrology at the time and before the writing of the Bible. Claudius Ptolemy was born in the 1st century A.D., and he wrote the Tetrabiblios, which was, means 5 books. He wrote that before the Gospels were written. So if they had wanted to write a textbook of Christian astrology for horoscopes, it could have been done, but that's not what the Bible is. So for the next few minutes, let's look at some of the astrological elements that are found in the Gospels. And at this point I go into a big diatribe. At this point, there is a great temptation that I think should be avoided by truth seekers. And this temptation is to, using the Bible, associate the 12 disciples with the 12 signs of the zodiac. To do this on the basis of the Gospels is silliness. It's utter nonsense. If you try to do this, and you look at each one of the Gospels, you find this out right away. Most of the disciples are mentioned by name, and that's no more. It isn't told anything about their character. So from the Bible alone, you cannot determine which sign of the zodiac is associated with which of the 12 disciples. We know a little bit about St. Peter, and we know about John the Beloved, but we don't even know that there's a difference between John the Beloved and John Zebedee's. And we know a little bit about Thomas. We know that Thomas was a doubter. But if you look at the Gospels, you don't know much at all about the other 9 disciples. We know a little bit about Judas because of the actions of Judas. Now, there have been a lot of people who have put themselves forth as authorities on mysticism and the Bible. And they make definitive statements saying that this disciple is this sign of the zodiac. They didn't get it from the Bible because it isn't in the Bible. They claim to have gotten it from some other source. Usually they claim clairvoyance. But there has to be something in them and in their work that makes their statements believable. And I have yet to see that. I haven't found a designation of which disciple is associated with which sign of the zodiac that is convincing to me. It's all spun out of the air, so to speak. So it's perfectly possible that people could have gotten the information from other sources. But if that's true, you expect something very, very profound from them, because it isn't, the spiritual worlds are not shallow. There's a lot of depth and there's a lot of richness to things that come out of the spiritual world. You tap the spiritual world just a little bit and so much comes out that it's almost unbelievable. Now, that Max Heindel was a clairvoyant, there's no doubt about that, because he gives insight, he gives explanation, and he gives you things that can be tested. He doesn't just give you authoritative statements. So the 12 disciples are a very different matter than the children of Jacob in the Old Testament. Like the children of Jacob in the Old Testament are associated with the signs of the zodiac. And you're even set up for that. Because when Abraham passes the trial of being willing to sacrifice his own son because the Lord asked him to, when he passes that trial, he is told that your descendants will be as the stars. And most people think that means in number, as many as there are stars in the sky. But what that means is if you look at his grandchildren, the children of Jacob, those children are like the signs of the zodiac. And you had those little descriptions of the prophecies. Jacob lies down and has visions, and he makes prophecies for his children. And those prophecies are very nice little codicils. They're very nice little descriptions of the signs of the zodiac. And so that's very different than the 12 disciples. With the 12 disciples, we don't have anything like that. So there is no doubt profound wisdom in having 12 around the 13th, because that is the basis for all in three-dimensional space for all fundamental structure. The crystals that form everything that is solid in the world are made on the basis of 12 around the 13th. And it's likely that the 12 around the 13th do have the character of the signs of the zodiac. But you can't get it out of the Gospels. And if you claim that you have other knowledge, you better be able to prove it, at least as far as I'm concerned. All right, my rant is done. I've done enough of that. If we're looking for the zodiacal signs in the Gospels, we must look elsewhere for them, because we're not going to find the 12 disciples. There is a tradition about the Gospels and the zodiacal signs that is not actually in the Gospels, but it is a tradition about the Gospelers themselves that I find very helpful, and it does work. Max Heindel tells us that the Gospels are formulae for initiation. And since each of the different Gospels has a different quality about it, it must be a formula for initiation for a different type of person, for different types of people. This is shown in the flavor of the Gospels. For example, if you look at St. John's Gospel, it's very different from all of the other three. It's a very deep, and it has a very transcendent quality about it. It's always talking about very, very lofty things. The tradition assigns each of the Gospels and its writer to one of the fixed signs of the zodiac. Luke is associated with Taurus, the bull. Mark is associated with Leo and the lion. John is associated with Scorpio and the serpent, and Matthew is associated with the human or the human face and Aquarius. An interesting thing about this is that Orthodox Christians accept this. In fact, you can go to any Christian store where they sell little Christian, pendants and things like that, and you'll find the sign. You'll find the symbols for the for Taurus, for the four fixed signs. You'll find them right there. They don't associate with astrology. They associate it only with the Gospels. They associate it with the four faces of the angel in the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament. Ezekiel looks into the heavens and sees a beast with four faces, and they are those four faces. And this is something we should be bringing into the evening talks. The Orphics, in their view of the deepest divinity, was called Phanes. And Phanes had the same four faces. So this is something that has a universal quality about it. The Gospel of Luke is very stolid. It's very graphic, as well as being loving and gentle. Mark is a very brief gospel. John is a gospel that soars, and Matthew is a gospel that is all about humans. So if you conceive of each of these four signs as being head of the element that they are in, Luke representing earth, Matthew representing air, John representing water, and Mark representing fire, you have a pretty good idea of the four types of people that each of the Gospels is related to. Unfortunately, there are other dimensions of character that are indicated by the Gospels, and those dimensions of character are not, they're super or supra-astrological. They go beyond that.
I've always heard of John as the eagle.
Yes.
That's the symbol in my...
Yes. Sometimes it says the eagle and sometimes as the serpent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Something new.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that we don't have designations for each of the disciples astrologically, because if we did, we could determine other things. Maybe it is fortunate that we don't have them, or we'd spend too much time doing astrology and not enough trying to live the life or developing ourselves inwardly. If we did have these designations, we could understand the disciples, why they worked in pairs or why they were used in triads. Like when special things had to be done, Christ always took 3 of the disciples. 3 is a number of the simplest kind of completion. 3 lines are the least number of lines that objectify space, so that there is space within the triangle and everything else outside. It's a simple objectification. The triangle has always been the symbol of manifest spirit. So, if you add a 4th to that, you have a tetrahedron. And when you have a tetrahedron, you automatically have the square and all of the other figures, and the manifestation of spirit through mathematical form into the external world is capable of accomplishment through the tetrahedron. So the tetrahedron has always been the symbol of Immaculate Conception, the birth of a spiritual being, not just spirit, but a being. And when you have that, you have the objectification on which divinity can reflect and know itself. And so the Christ with the 3, when that is present, the most important things are done. And the best case of that is in the Transfiguration. Christ takes Peter, James, and John up into the mount, which is a higher state of consciousness, and the archetypes of the lives of Moses and Elias speak to them, and the disciples are in awe, and after the incident is over, they understand that Elias was John the Baptist. But in order to be brought to that high state, there had to be 3 together, because the spiritual geometry of that with Christ produced the tetrahedron. And so it would be nice to know which 3 were brought together. Now, often, I can't give you verification of this, often Peter is associated with Pisces. It is the rock or the bottom of the hierarchies that are creative. John, as we just saw, that we do know, John is associated with Scorpio. And this would have James associated with Cancer if there had to be the watery triad in order to accomplish that. It makes sense because the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th houses are the houses that give the opportunities to leave the physical and move into the spiritual worlds. All right. We have just a few minutes left, and just a few minutes ago we said that the mundane houses play a very small part in the cosmological astrology that is in the Gospels. But there are a few places that it does come up. And the best example of houses in the Gospels that I can find is at Mark chapter 1, verses 32 through 34. It reads, "And at even, when the sun did set, they brought to him all that were diseased and them that were possessed with devils." And that's when the healing work was done. In horoscopy, the sixth house is the house of illness. And it is the house of taking care of illness. And it is one of the houses of healing. The sun is in the sixth house when the sun sets, right after sunset. As that passage is written, if you read it over again and again, you get an understanding that it wasn't just one incident. It was like every evening after sunset, they brought the sick to him and they brought the insane to him and they were healed. So it doesn't have to say that when the sun was in the sixth house, it says it in a different way. If we're aspiring to live in the imitation of Christ, that should be a good lesson for us. It should be that if we do healing work or if we do redemptive work, it is best to do it in harmony with the cycle of the day, so that you do it at a proper hour. All of the even number houses that are under the earth are critical in terms of illness. There is an old statement that I've known by experience since childhood. That is, when the sun goes down, the fever goes up. In the fourth house, it is a very critical time whether you're going to make it past midnight. And in the second house, there is a reflection from the eighth house, and more people die when the sun is in the second house than in any of the other houses. These are critical times when the illness is worse, but it's critical so that is the time that is also the best or the most ripe time for healing. So, the houses, you can find the houses in the Gospels, but you have to look very hard. So astrology is there, even the hard parts of it, and it's useful. The primary use of the Gospels, though, is as formulae for initiation. And when you are an initiate, you are automatically a healer. I have seen people ridicule the Gospels because Christ is spending so much time doing healing work. You know, like he's carried away with all the sick people. But that actually is our primary work right now. Before we can go forward, we have to heal or cure the things that are bad so that the creative energy can be used in a positive way for working on the creation. So our primary work right now with the creative energy is to use it in healing, and then when everybody is well or as everyone gets well, we can move forward and we can do creative work. So, the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception is a modern kind of Bible. And it's much more direct. But it's very clear from the writings of Max Heindel that our work as Rosicrucian aspirants is to learn to be healers. An initiate is automatically a healer. If you look at the Rosicrucians throughout history, their ministration to the people who were ill was the primary work of them. All right. Tomorrow we'll look at astrology and the Gospels in a different way, but now we will close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Yes.
So, are you, by what is implied by the gospel words, signs, is it implied that people with those signs are more able or?
No. This is cosmological. This is not horoscopes. It's just saying that of a person that has basically a nature that is earthy. And basically a nature that, sees things with the senses and is settled in the earth. It's not meant to be, like all Tauruses should read St. Luke's Gospel and follow that as their path. I don't think that's the case. It's likely that many that are Tauruses have that earthy quality, but it isn't necessarily a quick formula. Different people have different attractions to different Gospels. And some you feel more at home with. And the one that you feel most at home with is the one that you should resonate with and work with if you're trying to unfold spiritually.
And the reason I ask that is because I don't know if it's the right thing to say, but fire is very antagonistic to water.
Mm-hmm.
And so if one is designed for fire, one might be better off trying to get the information out of that.
Than out of the water gospel.
Some people have water and fire.
Yeah, but that is not according to the horoscope. This is where you feel yourself. Some people, even if they have a watery horoscope, are fiery people. And they are the people that should apply more to the fire gospel.
So the water one is Matthew.
The water one is Scorpio.
Okay. Which gospel is the one relating to water?
Which gospel?
Yeah.
The relating to water is St. John's Gospel.
St. John is the one relating to water.
Yeah.
Then what is Matthew?
Matthew relates to air.
Air.
Mark relates to fire. Less talk, more action.
Is it before someone is approached or starts initiation, the 9 levels of initiation, the prerequisite to that would be the production or the mastery of the inner nativity star, that spinal. That
would be there. You can't do esoteric work unless you have esoteric perception. All of us are in a preparatory stage. Tim might be more advanced than all the rest of us, but all of us are in a preparatory stage, and we're not really ready for initiation. If we were, they would initiate us very quickly, because the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. They really need capable people to do healing work and to help, prepare humanity for moving forward.
I have a question. You keep saying that at the Nativity we're talking about the Christ, not Jesus.
Yes.
So a distinction between that and the fact that I've heard that the birth of Christ, Jesus, whichever, was actually probably in April and not in December. So is the fact that we have the December at the time of the winter solstice,
yes.
Did the church come up with this based on astrology?
This truth was here before the church began.
Okay.
The truth comes first, and our putting it into a context of some kind or another follows after that. The cycle of the seasons and the withdrawing inward at midwinter, that's been for many thousands of years. In the case, see, there's a great literalism, a very great materialistic literalism that is very sad. When people hear the word the Son of God, they think like, oh, my little son, my little boy. But the Son is the person who represents the second attribute of the Godhead. And it comes from words that are very much misinterpreted. The words are interpreted in every translation of the Bible, they're interpreted wrong. They talk about the only begotten Son. It is not the only begotten Son. It is supposed to be the alone begotten Son. Because the Father, or the One, begot the second, or the second attribute, alone. Didn't have to apply to someone outside. When you went from one to having a second, that second is gotten from the Father alone, without anyone, without the agency of anyone else. Because if you read carefully in St. John's Gospel, where they talk about the so-called only begotten, a few lines later it says everyone becomes the child of God. So it isn't the only begotten, because there are many others, but it is the alone begotten. So that's a very important thing.
So now are we talking about Jesus or Christ?
We're talking about Christ. We're talking about what Christ represents. Christ is a being that is very highly evolved, and that being represents the second attribute of the universal spirit. Which is the love-wisdom principle, if you want to put it in words. Okay. If you're giving it the name the Son, or you're giving it giving it the name of the Son, you're giving it a specific character. And when an individual represents that character, that is the Christ. That is a being that does that. And that Christ is the focus of the region of life spirit. So you're asking me to, in a very brief time, tell you something that's taking me quite a few lectures to...
Is there one Christ or many?
There's one.
One. Okay.
There are many highest initiates of the class that Christ comes from, but there's only one that is the Christ. It is like in chemistry. You have a solution, a supersaturated solution. If you want that to precipitate, you put one crystal in, and everything forms around that one crystal. It's called a seed crystal. And for us, for our humans, the most advanced of our humans, the seed person around whom we all rally, is Jesus. That Jesus is the human. But because the Christ had not the capacity to enter into this world so that we could be taught directly and we could be redeemed directly by that love, had to use the vehicles of Jesus, the physical body and the etheric body. And when there was the baptism by John, I don't want to go into the details of it because it's very touchy how you deal with it. That is when the Christ entered the personality of Jesus and functioned in it during the 3 years ministry. So Christ Jesus is something very different than Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is Jesus himself as a threefold spirit. And when the second attribute of that threefold spirit, the Christ attribute, has been awakened, then you have Jesus Christ. Like eventually there will be Carol Christ or Richard Christ.
So it's like theoretically years 30 to 33 of his life, those 3 public years.
Yes. Yes, but those are most likely numerological numbers and not chronological.
Whatever, the public time period.
Yeah.
That's when it was Jesus Christ.
Christ Jesus. Yeah.
Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
So there isn't such a thing as Jesus Christ. There's Christ Jesus.
There's 2 different things.
2 different things. Jesus is the human.
Is a human that has awakened himself in the life spirit, and then is Jesus Christ, or you might say Jesus Christified. And Christ Jesus is the personality of Jesus inhabited by the cosmic being that is Christ, the second, the representation of the second attribute of the Godhead.
Thank you very much, because I've been listening to your tapes and my questions come up all the time.
Yeah.
And I really want a clarification. Is your recorder still on? So
yes.
this is on
Yes.
Good.
Because it is something that even a lot of Rosicrucian students haven't clarified in their mind. And I'll send you some of the tapes from this fall, or some of the recordings from this fall, because we're going to go into this in detail. There's a lot of controversy and there's a lot of misunderstanding about it, and we want to be very careful, because we don't want to talk about, instead of John the Baptizer, we don't want to have it be John the Drowner. Okay.
So Christianity, in its true form, would be based on Christ.
Yes, that is correct. And it's important that we all rally around Jesus as the leader of humanity, but Jesus is not Christ.
He was the vehicle for Christ to come through him.
Yes. Yes. Though in some circles, if you say that, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And
I know. I'm very careful about what I say, but I wanted clarification. So when I listen to this, I know what you're talking about.
I wonder what age it was Jesus Christ, when he was 8 or 10 years old, or was he born Jesus Christ?
Or when he was Christified himself? Yeah. I don't know. It might have been simultaneously at the same time. I don't know.
Well, he had such knowledge of the Scripture when he was 8 and 10 years old.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good talk.
Yes.
I don't have anything to offer you for lunch.
Oh, don't worry.
Okay, because I'm going to eat a couple, but I got some oranges and bananas. That's what I'm going to have a little oranges and bananas, and then I'm going to sleep.
Okay.
So on the cross, on the crucifix, it was Jesus.
It was the body of Jesus crucified, and when Christ was then, this is going to sound very funny, but in order to accept Christ as one of us, the way we accepted him as one of us was by killing the body that he was in.
Okay.
Because if he took mortality, he was then one of us.
Right.
And we had to accept him.
And the glorified Christ was somewhat more like what we think of like as the etheric body, the principle behind that kept the physical body going.
Yes. If you notice, after the crucifixion, they don't even recognize Jesus anymore.
Right. And that's
because he's different. Because he's no longer in that personality. Or in that personality. Okay.
Well, thank you very, very much for that clarification. Got one other question. I heard on the news that today is moving out day and tomorrow's moving in day and stay out of downtown. And where I want to go is the Chazen and the Overture. What is your recommendation for get going? And is downtown like Capitol Square or the university? Or
if you go to the Chazen, you can go down Park Street. You can't, it's really tough.
Yeah.
Got your map, I'll show you.
I know. That's
What?
The University of Lake Street just south of Republic.
Yeah.
That might be a good public.
I know.